Martignetti nonprofit radio coverage of 18NTC, the Nonprofit Technology Conference. We're coming to you from New Orleans, the convention center there. This interview is sponsored by Network for Good, easy-to-use donor management and fundraising software for nonprofits. My guest is Sheila Warren. Welcome, Sheila.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. Sheila is head of blockchain and distributed ledger technology at the World Economic Forum, and her workshop topic is, sorry, I'm not talking about you like you're not here. Your workshop topic is blockchain for nonprofits, fact versus fiction.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to tell you, this one has been intimidating me a little bit because I even did research on this. My voice is cracking. I'm not nervous, but it's a little intimidating because I've tried to crack the Bitcoin, not blockchain, but the Bitcoin topic 2 years ago at NTC. It was not a dedicated topic, but
right.
it became a digression that I created, and I regretted it while I was mired in it, and I couldn't get a way out gracefully, and we never really established
does suck you in.
what the heck Bitcoin is. Okay, so now since then I've done some reading. If I describe Bitcoin as there's a greater fool, does that make sense? It doesn't really have a value other than the hope that someone will buy it after me and therefore increase my value. I mean, is that?
I think you're jumping right into the controversy, right into the thick of it.
I am?
Yeah.
Maybe I read the wrong articles.
No,
okay.
I think that's great.
Let's back out of that.
Sure.
Okay.
We can go any direction you like.
I did some research. No, but I don't want to get mired in it. Okay. Bitcoin and blockchain. All right. Why don't we start, since Bitcoin was popular before blockchain, although I know that they are related and one relies on the other, right? I have that much down?
So I think you're ahead of many, in knowing that there's a distinction between the two.
Yes, okay, I do. All right. I'll just ask you simply, which I tried 2 years ago, what is Bitcoin and how does it relate to nonprofit?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'll start by saying, the number one thing I want people to take away anytime I do any kind of speaking is Bitcoin and blockchain are not the same thing. Now, they're equated because Bitcoin is built on something that's called the Bitcoin blockchain. So the terminology is quite confusing.
Okay.
But the best analogy I can think of is that Bitcoin is to blockchain as email is to the internet. Right?
Okay.
So blockchain is a foundational technology. When it is finally really baked into our systems, people will stop talking about it. The way we don't really talk about the internet anymore, except if we're being a bit ironic. We talk about applications, right? Yeah. And Bitcoin is an application on blockchain. It is the most famous application on blockchain. It was the first application on blockchain. The Bitcoin blockchain was built for Bitcoin. So it'd be like if the internet was built for email. You could do other things, but there'd be this equation. So what we're trying to do is tease that apart.
That's a very helpful analogy.
Let's tease it apart because there are a lot of other things you can do with blockchain that have nothing to do with Bitcoin. And even if Bitcoin were to completely fail and go away, there would still be applications.
There'd still be an internet without email. Okay.
Exactly.
Let's just, before we get to the blockchain value and its transparency, et cetera, let's just flesh out the Bitcoin a little more.
Great.
Okay, so I think nonprofits think of it because it's a possible fundraising. Right? I mean, it's a possible revenue source.
Yeah.
Donors could give gifts to you, and there have been enormously large gifts in the press of Bitcoin to nonprofits.
So I agree with that.
Okay, so let's dive into a little deeper into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
All right, so I was wrong. That was something controversial. I said that it doesn't have intrinsic value.
Well, I think does it have intrinsic value? Bitcoin itself, it's a big debate. Some people argue it absolutely has intrinsic value because it's filling a gap in a way that nothing else can really fill the gap. Some people argue it has absolutely no intrinsic value. It's all just like basically hyped value and market value, like whatever the PR around it is, the image of it is.
Value.
I think that's right. But that's arguably no different than many early stage, companies, right? Like when you think about equity in an early stage company, does it have value? TBD, so it's not that different. So I think to me what I find interesting or kind of mildly amusing at times is like the idea this is like this brand new distinction, right? We kind of have this model already. It's called early stage equity, right? Grants, right? Those might be paper and worth nothing. They might be worth a ton of money. You don't really know. And to be honest, you're kind of gambling when you buy digital currency.
You should have written the articles that I read. Of course, you should have written them. Not that I should have found your articles. I didn't know you when I was doing this research.
Oh, well, I wasn't in this space 2 years ago.
Okay.
I just entered the space 2 years ago.
No, but my research is more recent.
I
Have
see.
you written articles?
We have something coming out actually next week on April 19th. We're doing a launch of
Okay,
what we're calling a
okay.
blockchain decision-making toolkit about blockchain. And
Okay.
really trying to make it very accessible to the layperson, not in terms of a what is it, but is it valuable to you?
Is that we're going to
So-
find that on the World Economic Forum
Exactly,
site? Okay.
yes.
Okay. Good. Look for that if you want to know more about this. Okay. So the Bitcoin. All right. Backing out of the controversy part of it.
Right.
People could give you gifts in
Absolutely,
Bitcoin, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Just the way they used to give. Yes. You make some very good analogies. Early stage equity interest
That's
used to
right.
be a challenge for nonprofits
Exactly.
to deal with.
Exactly.
Okay, and now we've overcome that.
Well, at some point, real property was hard to deal with.
Yes,
Like getting real
for
estate was
sure.
hard. So it's just
Okay,
kind of the newest iteration of
Okay,
that.
so don't be
but it's
scared.
really no
Don't be
different.
scared of
Don't be
Bitcoin.
scared.
Yeah.
Don't be scared. And if
Okay.
you want to know how to receive it, receiving Bitcoin is actually not that hard. You go to Coinbase. I mean, this is one example, but the easiest example probably is you go to Coinbase. You get a receipt-only wallet.
Coinbase.
Coinbase is a company that,
go to
that
coinbase.com.
has what's called Bitcoin wallets. You get a receive-only Bitcoin wallet that allows you the ability to receive Bitcoin, convert it into fiat currency, and move on with your day.
Oh.
You can't buy Bitcoin with that wallet, but it's a pretty easy mechanism for getting Bitcoin. And there are other competitors as well. There's a kind of a cottage industry, if you will, in this kind of thing.
Okay, so
Yeah.
a receive-only wallet will be sufficient.
Correct.
And then how will you convert that to?
It's done
To
and sort
dollar
of
currency.
magically on the back end, right? You kind of pick your currency. Usually it's USD, and then they do the conversion for you at the current rate, and then you move it out. Now you're still accepting whatever the current rate is. You might decide you want to hold it longer and plan to play the market,
In that
et cetera.
case,
But it's like
no
it's no
different than any other
exactly.
than a foreign currency.
But the cashing out of it is just another. It's just a different. It's called a wallet, which is I think a very accurate term actually.
Yeah, that's good.
You just have one of those wallets that enables you to receive this particular kind of currency,
Yeah.
and then you just decide when you want to cash it out. You move on with your day.
Yeah,
That's just what you do.
These well-known icons, wallets, it helps. It
Yes.
helps those of us who are trying to get our way in. Oh, wallet. Well, I put my money in my wallet.
That's right.
So I'll just put my Bitcoin in my virtual wallet.
Exactly.
Okay. What's the one you named that we could go to?
Coinbase.
Coinbase.com, and there are others.
There are
Okay,
others.
but you can start there, and it's very simple. Okay, that's how to receive Bitcoin gifts for your nonprofit. Thank you. All right, that's very,
Sure.
that's very clear. You've been doing this a while. You've been talking to a lot of neophytes, clearly.
It's one of my favorite parts of my job.
Okay, excellent. Now let's go to blockchain technology.
Okay.
Now that we understand that Bitcoin is but one channel that's built on blockchain technology.
right.
Okay. How would you describe blockchain technology?
Yeah. So I like to use the example. I like to use
You have
just
another
a
good
story.
analogy? Or,
I think so.
okay.
You tell me.
Please,
But it
okay.
seems to work.
You're working so far.
So,
Yeah.
so if you and I if I were to buy something from you, whatever it was, then we might decide, okay, there are two options. One, we could just we don't trust each other. Let's say we could hand each other cash, right? And I would just hand you a whatever dollar bill, $10 bill. You give me the whatever it is, and I walk away, and we both walk away very happy. Our transaction is completed. Another way that people do this is we get on our mobile devices and we decide, are we using PayPal or Venmo or Square Cash or whatever it is, and we engage in a transaction. And we both, again, walk away satisfied that transaction is complete. There are 5 parties in the mobile example. There's you, me, your bank, my bank, and the intermediary, whether that's PayPal or whatever it is. And the reason that you and I are confident enough to walk away from the transaction feeling it's completed is because we trust those 3 intervening parties. We trust that they are going to all effectively and sufficiently debit my account and credit your account the right amount of money. And we don't have to really pay attention to that. Okay?
Right.
But you can imagine, and this is hypothetical in our case, in sort of the Western, the United States largely, but not everywhere. Right. You can imagine a world in which I don't have access to a bank account, or you don't, or both of us don't. There is no intermediary that's going to be trusted. The intermediary is easily hacked, whatever it is. For whatever reason, we have no trust in this system. And we want to exchange something that's analogous to cash. Bitcoin, or digital currency, is that analog. It is basically the internet analog of my handing you cash. There is no meaningful intermediary. There's no centralized intermediary that's mediating that transaction for us. Okay. We're able to peer-to-peer exchange that value. So that is the beauty, if you will, of digital currency. right? And what it provides in the marketplace that doesn't currently otherwise exist except for in paper
In cash.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
And how does blockchain technology fit into
blockchain is
this?
what enables that to happen. So what's happening in this magical middle?
Okay.
Because I'm not actually I'm not like brain sending you something like that, right? There's something happening in here. What's happening in here is blockchain is being deployed essentially. I mean, it's not technically accurate, but let's for our sake call it that.
Keep it
now,
simple.
what is actually happening? Okay, rather than me sending something to a central authority and kind of like a chain of central authorities, we're sending it to a distributed network. So we're saying, what are ways of creating trust? Well, one way of creating trust is to trust an intermediary. But if you don't have one, another way of creating trust is to make it totally distributed. So imagine if between us there was a network of 1,000 computers, not connected to each other, independent, pseudonymous, so no one knows who anyone else is, right? And at the exact same time, they're creating a simultaneous, this is again not technically accurate, but let's leave it be, a simultaneous record of our exchange. They're indicating I opened up my digital wallet, I released, 1 Bitcoin, which is a lot of money, so you gave me something very valuable in exchange, and you receive it, okay? And in order to hack that transaction, you would have to convince 1,000 computers to change their record.
That's why I was going to ask you, why are there 1,000 computers? That's why?
That's why.
For security.
For security. So as you can see, it's far more secure than a central database that could be easily hacked. Right, like one source of truth can be hacked very easily. 1,000 identical sources of truth are very hard to hack.
So each of these computers houses the same information.
Same ledger. We call it a ledger.
A ledger about our transaction.
Yes. And this is why we call it distributed ledger technology.
And we can do this because my voice keeps cracking like I'm 14. Because the cost of storage is so de minimis on the margin that we don't have to worry about all this redundancy. I mean, we've got 1,000 computers with the same, we've got this large network with the same data, the same ledger, but that's because storage is so cheap?
It's not so much because storage is so cheap, it's because it's a method of achieving trust, right? Okay. So if you either you trust something or you trust nothing. And if you trust nothing, then 1,000 pseudonymous computers is about as good as you're going to get, right? Exactly, right? Nobody has an incentive to screw up our transaction or record it incorrectly. And if they do, if one computer in that 1,000 computers records a different version, it's computationally spotted almost immediately. And there's a check that happens, like what happened, what's going on there. So it's very, very hard to hack. It makes it quite secure.
How about hacking it so that the one becomes the accurate transaction and the other 999 convert to that?
That's computationally basically impossible. Yeah, it's cryptographically impossible to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the way it works.
I thought I had a breakthrough.
I'm not going to get to
I thought I had a breakthrough.
You're like, I found it. I discovered it.
I was going to kill it. Okay. No, I don't want to kill it. No.
So what's interesting about this, right, is so this is the premise of the Bitcoin blockchain and of what are called public blockchains. But interestingly enough, what you're getting are the human impulse, I think, is to say, well, if I want to control something, if I don't trust something, I want to control it. Right? So you're getting a lot of explosion of these permissioned blockchains, which means that you know who all the computers are, basically. Or you only allow computers that you have kind of vetted into the system. Okay. But when you do that, it becomes more hackable,
less secure,
right?
Right.
Exactly.
It's got to be...
It's kind of like counterintuitive.
Pseudonymous.
Yeah.
Pseudonymous?
Pseudonymous.
They don't know which each other is.
Correct.
That's right. Pseudonymous.
That's
very
right.
Good. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. So what's the... I'll ask it instead of trying to figure it out. What's the value of this to nonprofits?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value to this. So one, I think in the sort of remittance space, in terms of programmatic work, there are a lot of places where, charitable work is done using remittances, using kind of these last mile payments, like problems that have existed for a long time that we've been unable to really have a great solution for. There's a huge problem, actually, as we realized recently through a World Bank project. There's a huge problem with charities, certainly in certain kinds of regions, Syria, other kinds of places, being unbanked, like having no access to bank accounts. And in many of these regions, people are literally taking paper cash into these environments and using it to provide services, right? Hugely problematic, very unsafe, very risky and dangerous activity. If you have a digital wallet, it's that much more secure. Right? Like it's actually that much harder to steal that, hack it. You can prove ownership using encryption. There's a lot of other things about it that are better. Right? Okay. So in these situations, and that's sort of the extreme example. It's the example we're seeing a lot of different application level. There's other completely non-currency related applications of blockchain. So one that I think is really critical is digital identity. So this comes up a lot in the refugee asylee situation. So you can imagine a family has to flee in the middle of the night. They can't bring any of their papers with them. There's no proof of who they are, their citizenship, their credentials, whether medical license, whatever it is. There's medical records, nothing like that. If all of that were on a distributed ledger, it would be secure. It's not a paper-based system, right?
Yes. Okay.
So when you think about the application layer where you're moving away from paper and you're storing something in a secure manner, but not in some sort of like database of the government where the government could be corrupt and come in and kind of change things up and disavow it, but in a way that really is truly secure, that you own the only entrance key to. Like, that is very powerful to think about, you know? There are, we know that in homeless encampments in the United States, leaving aside like these war-torn kinds of regions, even in the United States, there's no accurate record of the homeless population because people who are born homeless often don't have records, right? And then if you die homeless, there's no count about that that's done accurately. And the census acknowledges it's completely off with that population. Imagine if there were a digital ledger that you could create around that. Now, the policy around how you do that is very challenging. It's not an easy problem to solve, but at least there is a different option now for access to the systems. Exactly.
For preserving it.
Correct.
Once you overcome
creating and
once
preserving
you overcome the challenge of
creating
gathering the data,
correct.
There's a place to preserve it, and the person's data is not vulnerable to loss or hacking, et cetera. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, one of the articles I read talked about the transparency, and the example was a donor giving to a program and tracking the progress of that program, and then tying her funding to milestones that she sees through the blockchain technology, through some user interface, I guess, to blockchain. Can you help people understand better than I just did what I'm talking about?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So I think we call this supply chain integration, and I think an aid flow is an example of a supply chain of cash, but there are supply chains of all kinds of things. And I think it's easier to understand this if we think about a supply chain, and we'll take mining as an example, because this, I think people really understand this.
Okay.
So
you're 100% with your analogies.
Thank you.
So I'll make sure we bring it back to the nonprofit, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Mining.
So when you think about mining and you think about sustainable practices, right? So people don't want blood diamonds, for example. There is a international process established called the Kimberley process that evaluates whether or not a particular diamond.
What's it called?
The Kimberley process.
Okay.
So it evaluates whether or not a diamond is mined using fair labor, no child labor, all the things that you actually would care about as a consumer of this diamond. And using blockchain technology, those diamonds are actually etched, and you can follow using a combination of RFID, Internet of Things, and blockchain, a diamond throughout the entire supply chain from the moment it's mined, and you can certify that the mine itself was done with correct worker conditions, et cetera, or environmental, whatever it is.
Practices.
You can track that all the way to the refinery, to the manufacturer, to the retailer, to the consumer, right? So there is certainty that that specific mineral or metal was taken all the way through, and this applies to other kinds of minerals and metals as well. You could imagine something similar that would apply to, cotton or coffee or whatever it is, right? Like you could actually certify that a particular bag of coffee beans was harvested on a plantation that met fair labor practices and was organic, and whatever the things are you care about, fair trade certified. You could track that through the supply chain, and you could therefore ensure and give meaning to some of these labels that we don't actually have any proxy for ascertaining are actually true. Right? So this provides more accountability and transparency because you can track the same good throughout an entire system. Now, the same thing is true of aid flows. So a dollar originates somewhere. It's basically just a supply chain all the way through. So any diversion of that money can actually be tracked. It's a really interesting question. If you do this in digital currency, every time digital currency is exchanged, there is a record created. By definition, it's not like cash where it just kind of can vanish. There's no ability for it to vanish. It's impossible. Right? So if I give it to you and you give it to some other intermediary and they suddenly divert it to some corrupt whatever it is, that currency can be tracked. So you can create accountability in the system. You can show that it went to pay your staff or that it went to, a contract to build the well or whatever it is. You can actually show that, and you can report all that ledger back to the donor.
Okay.
Exactly.
How does the organization interact with blockchain, with Is it right to say the blockchain? No, there is no the blockchain.
It depends on.
Yeah,
There's a blockchain, and we normally just say blockchain.
Okay,
But it depends on the.
It's
grammatically interesting. Let me tell you.
Okay. What's the user interface?
This is the perfect question.
For the donor end. Oh, really? No,
Perfect question.
At least I'm asking you. Finally.
Yeah.
20 minutes in, I got one good question.
This is a great question.
Okay. For the donor and the nonprofit, how do we interact with?
Yeah.
What's our interface?
This is one of the challenges right
with
now.
blockchain.
And it's one of the reasons there isn't this gigantic explosion in use cases. Even though there are theoretical use cases that everyone agrees on, people are now in the
There's got to be companies
working
on this.
Exactly.
There's got to be startups
we're
working
in
on
the
this.
stage where this is being developed. So when you think about the early internet and everybody was kind of had their C prompt and was typing things and whatever,
yes, I remember
that was not accessible to
on deck,
most people on
deck.
deck.
I had
Exactly.
I had a deck.
You pine, you were fingering people, like all this business, right?
Yes, that's when I went to college.
It was not accessible to a lot of people, right? But once you had a graphical user interface that came into play, people could type in plain English, and you kind of had WYSIWYG. You had what you see is what you get. You had these interfaces that were just more intuitive.
I do know WYSIWYG.
Yeah,
you would have got away with that.
I wasn't sure if other people.
Oh, thank you very much.
For your listeners.
Well, I have jargon jail, but I would for WYSIWYG. I mean, that's well established.
Awesome.
That's not jargon. Okay.
Fantastic. I appreciate that because I agree
with
you.
Yeah, I'm fearful that you have low expectations of my understanding.
No, it's not you.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, nonprofit radio listeners are at least at my level. Most are well beyond. Most are well beyond.
We'll go with WYSIWYG.
Most are well beyond.
Those were all huge innovations that enabled the explosion in things like email and Google and search engines and whatever. Until you had that, it was very hard to imagine or contemplate those things.
There are Steve Jobs' times 1,000 working on this right now.
Exactly right. Okay. So give it a little time, and we're going to get there. And before you know it, we're not going to talk about blockchain anymore. It's going to be kind of this thing of the past, right? No one's talking about consensus mechanisms or proof of work or blah, blah, blah. No one's going to care about any of that. We're going to be like, oh, did you check out your whatever the company is? It's the new Facebook that's now built on blockchain that we all now can't live without.
Yeah.
You know? Okay. So we're getting there. We're getting there.
Awesome. All right. You have very good analogies. You have a very good way of explaining this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
Excellent,
that.
Sheila. Thank you. We still have a couple minutes left together. So what more do you want to say? Is there another level we can go to?
Yeah.
Is there a story you want to tell about a nonprofit using this technology? What do you got left?
Yeah, I will say a couple of things. I think that, I would really encourage listeners and anyone, to really think beyond the digital currency example. And so we gave some examples of identity and supply chain and others. There's interesting work happening around impact and how charities can demonstrate impact using blockchain and kind of tag metrics to not necessarily to cash, but to sort of the strategic planning. Like there's all kinds of different implications for this technology. And really, the kind of like joke in the blockchain nerd, of which I am one, system is to say, like, when you really start thinking about what this can do, you have these like 3 a.m. wake ups where you think like, oh my God, like it could do that, it could do that, it could do that. And then you have to kind of dial it back down and like, we're not there yet, So one example, what got me, my 3 a.m. moment that got me really hyped about this technology was in criminal justice, something I'm very passionate about, and thinking about chain of custody of evidence. So thinking about the way that evidence gets lost, things like rape kits or DNA evidence or whatever it might be.
What about chain of custody of people?
Exactly.
And I'm thinking more of in other countries where
people who are tortured or vanished, get disappeared,
the
kidnappings.
institutions are not as trusted as most of our institutions are.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay,
so we're doing a big project on anti-corruption work in South America where we're thinking about government accountability and transparency and how you can actually work around and mitigate corruption, which is omnipresent in many parts of the world, using this technology because of the ability to track and trace, which is really key. So I think that is where the big innovation is going to happen. It's already happening and will continue to happen in this space. And the implications, I think, for nonprofits are quite profound. The ability to track and trace something or someone is very, very
So any object, like you had said, the diamond is physically etched.
Yep.
I mean, it's got to be obviously a pretty small etching.
Yes.
So it doesn't
It's
damage
microscopic,
the diamond.
basically.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
So, but any physical thing, so physical evidence in a criminal case.
Yeah.
It's tagged.
A rape kit.
It's tagged.
A bloody glove as a random example.
Okay. Oh, very good. Okay.
There you go.
So forever. Traceable.
Forever,
We'll never have.
traceable.
We won't have lost evidence.
You'll know, or if it is disappeared,
You'll
you will
know
know
at what
exactly
stage-
at what
stage it disappeared.
Exactly at what stage it disappeared. There won't be a guess. There's no ability to hide, right? And you can mark that security with a geolook. You can geotag it, so you know literally exactly where that thing was at the last recorded exchange of it.
Okay.
Right. So, which is really profound when you think about that.
We have about a minute left. What do you love about this work? Not so much the technology, but like what do you love about explaining it to people?
Yeah, I think it really is I don't think it's surprising how intimidating it is, but it's a very intimidating technology, in part because there's so much media attention about it, the volatility of the currency, and then Bitcoin millionaires and all this kind of stuff. Billionaires,
right?
and all this stuff. And and it's a community that is really fascinating.
Someone just used Bitcoin. I know I asked you to talk, and now I'm interrupting.
No.
I'm sorry. Someone just used Bitcoin to fund every single request that was in DonorsChoose.org. Every single one got funded overnight.
There's a lot of money in this
Charles
space.
Rich asked for it, and he couldn't believe that he got it.
Yeah. Well, it's also crazy because this is there's so much money in this that there are people who they won't do press. Like the people that really, really have the money have security, they've hired security. So it has this thug element to it and this history of illicit actors and nefarious activity, kind of thing. Because arms were sold using Bitcoin. That is a fact.
Okay.
People were trafficked using Bitcoin. That is a fact, right? And the idea that we've moved away from that, not saying that isn't still happening, because let's be candid, it is still happening, right? But that's not the use case for which it was really designed. And most people in the space are not interested in that kind of activity. So when you think about the shift away and the movement opportunity, it's really exciting to get, ordinary people, I'll call them, lay people, aware of this, at least at a base level, and to not be afraid of it. I find that very rewarding.
Okay. And we no longer fear the internet.
That's
and
right.
Automobiles.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or
How far back do you want to go? Boats? Okay. All right. We covered every mode of transportation. All right. Sheila Warren, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Real pleasure.
Such a pleasure.
You helped enormously.
I'm so glad.
She's the head of blockchain and distributed ledger technology at the World Economic Forum. What's the article that's coming up that we should look for?
It'll be April 19th, and it's called The Decision Making Toolkit. And it'll be on our website.
Awesome.
And our Twitter.
My interview with Sheila is sponsored, my pleasure, by Network for Good, easy-to-use donor management and fundraising software for nonprofits. And thank you so much for being with Nonprofit Radio coverage of the Nonprofit Technology Conference 2018.